Hello and welcome to Surveyor Says, the podcast from the National Society of Professional Surveyors. Each week, we bring you fascinating guests that are involved in the profession of surveying. We cover a lot of ground, including Table Lay Talk with Gary Kent, Point of Order with the NSPS Joint Government Affairs Team, Future Focus, highlighting current and future leaders of the profession, and everything survey-related in between. Thanks for joining us here on the podcast, and hope you enjoyed listening to this episode of Surveyor Says. Hello and welcome to another episode of Surveyor Says. This is installment number 2 of our new series called What is Surveying? And what we're trying to accomplish is to really talk about what surveying is in the 21st century. And so we're looking at it from a perspective right now with our first couple of guests from the GIS and the surveying world and how geospatially we're all working together. Our guest today, well, it's actually going to be kind of a twofold. She's here to talk about her GIS side and her surveying side, but she's also the new director, NSPS director for South Dakota. So we'd like to welcome you, Miss Linda Foster, and give us a little bit of background of how in the world you got in both surveying and GIS and how that all mixes together.
Well, thank you, Tim. It's a pleasure to be here with you today. And it's so much fun to come and have these conversations. And you ask, how did I get where I am? I think is the root of your question there. And a little bit about myself. I hold a Bachelor of Science degree in geological engineering. And I also hold a master's degree in GIS, Geographic Information Systems. And along the way, I also did become a professional land surveyor. So you might ask yourself, how does one end up in this sort of a predicament maybe, or profession or career? And it was a bit of a interesting path. I started out introduced to GIS actually in high school, working for the U.S. Forest Service as a student employee. Mind you, this has been some years ago now, and technology has come a long, long ways. And of course, being a student, I was the lower end of the totem pole and found myself spending many hours hanging over a digitizing table and thinking this was the most awful thing that could ever happen. And proceeded to go on to engineering school, where I again was introduced to GIS through my degree program. And now we're moving, more into the technology age. And so we have a GUI interface, which was pretty exciting. And I started to understand the real power of GIS and how it could really help in engineering. Along the way, I also was scheduled to take mine surveying as a geological engineering student. However, the professor was on sabbatical the semester I needed to take it. So I found myself in the civil engineering department taking the civil engineering land surveying course and loved it. Really enjoyed my time there. And after I graduated, I did a couple of internships along the way that the GIS background just kept following me, and found myself in my first full-time job, and I just couldn't shake the GIS component, but found myself working in a civil engineering firm. So really the engineering, the surveying, and the GIS just have been this perfect storm kind of around me for the duration of my career, which is now about 18 years in. And I've found myself just working all three aspects of it really consistently. And I obtained my land surveying licensure after I came to work for the firm I'm with now. I've been here going on 16 years, small firm. So you start out in the field on a surveying crew. We would survey all day, come in at night, reduce data, and get back out there the next day. And I came up through the ranks under some fabulous land surveyors here in our company. And so that's really where I came to be. I've developed the GIS and geospatial program for our company, but have done it with an eye and a mind towards civil engineering, construction, and with the land surveying component.
And you've hit on something right there and I know so often we still have this engineers versus surveyor battle as well, but I like the way you put it about not necessarily, yes, the perfect storm of really kind of this three-legged stool, but but the engineering, the surveying, and the GIS, the way you just described it, it does complement each other so well. And that's what I guess, just hearing that tone of your voice and how much that has worked out as far as being able to put all these pieces together and really make your projects that much more efficient and fun, if nothing else.
It really has been fantastic to have a pretty decent background in all three areas, because I have, I think, some unique insight perhaps for each of the three, and in the strength and the benefit that each one brings to the table, and can come into meetings and hold those conversations and maybe bring different perspectives to each stakeholder group that I happen to be working with, whereas just sometimes folks aren't aware of what's possible or what capabilities exist or what's appropriate even sometimes.
Exactly. Well, first off, yes, welcome to the NSPS family. We are looking forward to having, you've went through your first virtual meeting. Now it looks like the fall is going to happen for us in our meeting in Oak Brook, Illinois, which will be a lot of fun. It's my backyard, and it'll be fun. So it'll be nice to have you and face to face and be able to interact on a real world basis. So that the welcome aside, here we are talking about surveying, and the grand question we're now raising is, what is surveying? And so from your perspective, having started in GIS, got involved in civil engineering, jumped into land surveying, and spent time in the field, in the office with the different technologies, I guess the short answer for Linda Foster is, what is surveying in the 21st century?
That's a great question, Tim. And I think really fundamentally it comes down to what you as a land surveyor would probably see land surveying to be. And then that's at its core, the records research, getting out in the field and finding the evidence and measuring that evidence. And then at the end of the day, it's coming back and applying the law, to the record and rendering that opinion and having that legal, authority, if you will, to perform that type of a task is really what sets a land surveyor apart, I think, in the grand scheme of things.
Sure. All right. So we're going to rattle off through a few standard questions we're going to be asking through this series. And the first one is, to me, is a biggie, and it's geospatial data. And should any single profession actually claim to own it, or should we just all pitch in and realize that we all have a hand in geospatial data?
I think you hit the nail on the head there, Tim, and that is, we all have a hand in geospatial data. And at the end of the day, fundamentally, I believe that you really have to step back and look at and understand, how is this data being used? What are we doing with this information, and how is it going to be used? And that answers, I think, every question that needs to be answered. It can be summed up with that one question.
Exactly. Well, and because in doing some research with this and really starting to kind of kick this around, and we'll have some future guests that I think are going to be able to expand on that even further. I think back to just simple geodesy and the geodetic surveyor, that when it was a lot of solar observations, lunar observations, a lot of high tech work that was very, very time critical, very tedious, very precise. So, back in the 60s, 70s, whatever, if somebody said they were doing state plane coordinates, really the geodesists were the only ones really being able to pull that data together with any really sense of accuracy and precision. But GPS, GNSS changed all of that, obviously, for us, that we're pulling geospatial data pretty far down with our phones. All this dual frequency stuff's getting it pretty tight. So I guess what we're talking about this technology. We're talking about data collection now. Um, realistically, it's all very, very accurate and precise now. Who can use it? I mean, really, I guess getting away from maybe licensure and who needs to be using this accurate of data in your opinion?
Well, there again, I think you could really say, theoretically, anyone. What's your purpose? What's your goal? What's your end game? Linda Foster, as a, just as a mom and as a weekender out on my mountain bike, maybe I really want to know for sure, with a pretty good degree of certainty, the grades on those trails that I'm going to go ride. And I have the capability to figure that out, and that's okay. That's great. And we can do that now. I mean, you and I both know and understand that's a real possibility, and that's a real use. And I think that's great. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. Now, if someone who has the ability to run around with a let's just say quote unquote survey grade GPS unit or equipment that's just really capable of getting a highly accurate reading, decides that maybe they want to go stake something out and it's going to be built by a contractor. But this said individual is not licensed or is not, now we're starting to cross lines and get into an arena where we need to be careful and think about what is it we're doing. Now, maybe let's put the GIS hat on and say, you know what, we need to go get updated road centerline information so that we can update the GIS routing system. That's great. That makes your life better. That makes my life better. And it's for a specific purpose that is not involved in boundary determination, is not involved in engineering design where there's liability, health, safety, and welfare considerations, and those legal matters that come into play.
Exactly. Because the reason I asked that is because there's this ongoing question now and lawsuits about some of the technology being used out there. And I'll speak specifically of the lawsuit that's going on in North Carolina right now with a UAV user and taking orthometric photos and applying county GIS lines and putting these things together, but yet saying, no, it's not a survey. Well, but you're presenting something that looks like a survey and could be misconstrued as a survey. That I think, no, I know you hit it on the head, that it comes down to your expertise. It becomes down to your experience. It comes down to your licensure. Are you properly trained to do what you say you're going to do? And in a lot of cases, are you licensed to do what you're doing? And the mountain bike analogy is spoken like the true geo geek. I think some of us all are. So, because that's how I always laugh about the people that are geocaching and they've got, they've got it down to, down to the nearest decimeter. And I'm like, really? We're looking for a tin stuck in a tree somewhere and you're down to the decimeter. I don't think so. But anyway, let's change gears just a little bit with the geospatial data. And get back, really from the GIS side as well. What cadastral implications should we be thinking about when we're talking about geospatial data and tying land boundaries and these GIS systems, databases, to geospatial data? And how important is it that the experience, the accuracy, and the knowledge, and in some cases licensure, really gets tied together with that database information?
That's a topic that's really near and dear to my heart on regardless of what the hat I'm wearing at the time, whether it's Linda the GISP or Linda the LS. Both aspects of it are really truly important. And I think when we step back and look at what cadastral data is, cadastral information at its heart is the basis of our taxation system, and how our counties are able to organize and inventory and manage the taxation of the lands in their counties. And that's really the fundamental purpose of a cadaster at its core. And I think when we, in our country, it's so interesting because, there's title for transfer, and then there's cadastre and taxation, which is, two different arenas, if you will. And when you're thinking about cadastre and taxation, you're really looking at it as more of a fabric. Your land system and your land records become a fabric, if you will, and they need to flow and be cohesive. And you need to understand, from a county-wide basis, what that inventory of land looks like. And the really interesting thing for me as a land surveyor and a GIS professional is that our systems and our capability has grown to the point we can now take record information and store it in these cadastral systems. Whereas before, one of the age-old, fights between the GIS folks and land surveyors is that cadastral information is not survey grade. It was not surveyed. It was not reconstructed. And that's all true. But there again, what's our purpose and how are we using it? Before GIS and digital means came on the scene, I have been in many, many county offices that there is a Mylar or a paper map hanging on the wall. And that fabric, if you will, that land base was maintained with a pencil and ruler, if you're lucky, and sketched, on the wall to the best of their abilities. And so in my mind, we've done nothing but make strides and improvement. Is it perfect? No. If you want to put on your land surveyor's hat and look at a cadastre, you can find faults all over the place.
Oh yeah.
But if you look at it with a little bit more of a, eyes forward type of an approach, it's really done wonderful things for us. It's allowed us to be more efficient in our taxation. It's allowed us to, tie those systems together and be able to perform the task or tasks necessary for that particular effort. Now, if we're transferring title to a property, we're platting a property, we are, going through the titling process, the transferring process, then that's a very different story. And absolutely, you need to have the land surveyor involved because now we're looking at one patch in the patchwork quilt. On a more very zoomed in basis, now we're talking about a single transaction. We're talking about a very specific act with legal implications, and that's where the difference to me is the cadastre is bigger picture over here, and the titling and the land surveying acts that are going on are over here on a much more granular scale.
Yep, exactly. And it's interesting that, we're in talking about the cadastres, and I know there are different groups within the United States that would like nothing more than to convert our Torrent system, our title system, over to a cadastre. But, in a perfect world, I think it would be a great thing. I would love to have a real, robust, more accurate cadastre on everything. But, the countries that have been able to do it, we've got areas, we've got states that are bigger than Switzerland. So it's one thing to turn a whole country like Switzerland into one big cadastre. But unfortunately, there's just too many hurdles, I think, to get over. But in the meantime, I think you're right. I think we need, the more we can apply good geospatial data to with cadastre information, you're right. It's just going to make things that much more robust. I couldn't agree more.
And the wonderful thing about some of the new, the new capabilities that are out there now, when you're talking, specifically about cadastre, is the ability, and this just really excites me as a GIS professional and a land surveyor, is the fact that these existing cadastres can be improved now. And I mentioned one piece of that, and that is you can actually store record information with those representations, let's call it, of those properties. But we can take that a step further now, and we can actually take, found evidence in the field, ground measurements, and apply least squared adjustments to this fabric to make it better. And that's just tightening up an existing data set, if you will. That's not necessarily treading over into, the piece of what the land surveyor does inherently.
Right.
That's just improving that cadastre to be the best form of itself it can possibly be. To me, there's still very much a separation of what the say, GIS professional is doing with that cadastral data set versus what a land surveyor's role is
Exactly.
in that process.
No, you're right on the money there. You know, the argument that I've heard over the years, especially early on, that if we go to that level and we start saving these cadastral parcels on literally state plane coordinates or what have you. I know that we don't have this problem in Illinois, but we had this situation in Wisconsin where I'm licensed there as well, that the state went through and remonumented all of the sections. And on every section corner, there is a state plane coordinate. So the old guard says, why did they do that? Now somebody that goes out and surveys that section, they don't even have to go physically survey it. They can inverse between those coordinates and they don't even have to do that anymore. To which my argument is, you know what? If somebody wanted to copy a survey, they're going to do it anyway. I mean, that comes down to, and that's one reason we press on ethics and experience and, you know, what a true professional does. So if somebody wants to try to beat the system, they're going to beat it anyway. But to have the system in place to where it helps that surveyor be able to go find things and be able to effectively put those fabric pieces together, why not? Why not have all of that data in basically real time? So, you know, that's just my little piece of it that I think we need to trudge ahead and continue to build as many cadastral databases as we possibly can.
No, I couldn't agree more. And, you know, to your point about having, say, those corners, you know, found and already out there and documented, and but that's a snapshot in time. And you and I both know, as a land surveyor, doing your due diligence and performing the tasks that you perform as a surveyor, that's going out and finding that evidence, you know, for each survey that you complete. And that's part of the process. That's part of what we do. And so you're absolutely right. I think it only helps us be stronger by having that information. It's a snapshot in time. It's a communication tool that strengthens things for everyone who may have an interest in it. And as you said, it can go two ways. It can either be used appropriately or not, and that's gonna be the case any time.
Exactly. If people are always going to find a way to cheat the system, and bottom line is, it's the rest of us doing what we can to protect the public to make sure that those people are caught and moved on and pushed out of the way. But something else you touched on earlier that I want you to help the listener understand, because you are on both sides of the fence. Licensed surveyor, GIS professional, or GISP. Tell us what it takes to become a GISP and I'm trying to put words in your mouth, but the substantial amount of work it takes and the certification to become that GISP, and how that relates or not to being a licensed land surveyor.
Sure. No, I think that's a great question, and probably in a lot of folks' minds, you know, what really is the difference? And I think we have to step back and first understand what we're talking about in regards to the difference between the two. And that's fundamentally, what is certification versus licensure. And certification, you know, at its core is generally a program with ethical standards and a professional body that there's a standard of knowledge and competency and expectation and ethical behavior expectations that get rolled into a certification process. Licensure, on the other hand, is statute-based and legally based. And so there's a very big difference there in how they're applied and what the implications are there. Now, to address your question specifically, on the GISP side, it's a very rigorous process. There's a lot of background knowledge and information and experience that has to be demonstrated, you know, an application process, much like, you know, going through your LS processes, experience, and then ultimately an exam to at least have a baseline, you know, a proof of a baseline competency in that particular area, and that being the GISP. So a little bit different process, a little, you know, different administration, obviously, and implications to the two. Obviously, the land surveying side of things is education requirements, experience requirements, and then, the two legs of testing essentially that go into obtaining your licensure. And of course, that varies somewhat from state to state.
Well, and I guess the question then would be from your perspective, the GISP, I mean, that's pretty, everything I've read about it, and to me, it's a substantial certification. And yes, it's a certification versus being licensed, which is only means it's recognized different in statutorily. But somebody that goes through that process, I mean, that's a pretty high achievement, wouldn't you say?
Oh, I would agree, absolutely. That program has been very, very well developed, and just a tremendous amount of effort and expertise and time and care has gone into developing that program specifically to have a baseline or a basis for the GIS profession to have some distinguishment and some benchmarking of that competency.
Exactly. Well, good. And I'm like I said, I know there are a lot of people that discount the GISP, that it's because it's a certification, it's it's like a mail order certificate you get. Sorry, folks, it's not. It's pretty robust, pretty substantial, and every GISP I know, which I didn't know I knew as many as I did, that it just, to me, it adds that much more respect that I give that person, knowing what they've accomplished in the GIS realm. So kudos to you on having both, being, like I said, having feet on both sides of the fence.
Thank you.
One last geospatial question for you. What are you seeing as far as, the technology? I mean, obviously we talked about GNSS and we're able to get more geospatial data, but the software has gotten so much more robust. The software has gotten so much more scalable. I mean, now instead of, before we were talking megabytes and even gigabytes, now we're talking terabytes of information at times, especially with remote sensing and all of the scanning and the millions and billions of points. How are you seeing the GIS software being able to make even a boundary and a topographic survey better, and being able to use that data for, I won't say other uses, but for better analyzation of what that data has been picked up for?
Well, I think that's a great question. And, I have, as you're well aware, the unique perspective of kind of being on three sides of the table, and that being the engineering side, the surveying side, and also the GIS side. And, we find tremendous value in GIS and its capability in being able to take the data that's captured at the front end of a project and be able to use it throughout the project lifecycle, really. And ultimately, it comes down to, again, what's your purpose and what part of the project are you working in, or what is your need and your purpose? For instance, in an engineering design project, we go out at the very beginning of a project, and of course, you're doing traditional data collection. You're determining, getting data and records to determine boundaries and establish right-of-ways. And you're also doing substantial topographic surveying. And that may be in support of a design, but along the way, we may now have a drainage study involved. And so that's where now we're, 2/3 of the way into the design and the project life cycle. And now GIS is a shining star, because we've taken layers upon layers of data that we've already put the effort and legwork into, and we're feeding them into a GIS system. Mind you, we still design in Civil 3D or AutoCAD or your standard, design platforms. I don't want to name vendors specifically, but that's those tools are all in the toolbox. And so, the GIS really shines when you're beginning to get into analysis and answering those real world questions, answering design scenarios and design questions. And then you continue on through the life cycle, and now you have a wonderful set of data for asphalting purposes. So now, if your firm's also involved, say, in the construction administration and the asphalting side of things, you just continue to march along, and it just parlays right into that project life cycle. So I hope I've done a decent job of kind of illustrating how the accuracy of the data collection, the software, and all of that can really just tie together nicely and parlay from, let's just say, cradle to grave on a typical AEC project, if you will.
Absolutely. And I think that's something that the surveying community needs to embrace more specifically, even the technician side. I like what you said there about as-builts and being able to use that data going forward. I think one thing the technicians and even, surveyors are going to have to get over their fear of more attributes, that you can have more than just a point number and a description. And it needs to be, it can be, if we know more about the fire hydrant that's just been installed, that can be tied down to a manufacturer and installation, rough installation date. And there's just so much more data that can be collected during those times for infrastructure review, for assessment, and being able to know how long some of this stuff has been around for. That way municipalities can kind of put a shelf life on some of this stuff, and they know that going back into their records that, oh yeah, this industrial park went in 2019, and that's, and those fire hydrants were installed then, and tie that back with flushing the hydrants and, a lot of stuff. So I think that's one thing that the surveying community has to get used to, is having a data collector with a lot more attributes to be able to plug in there at times when needed. So no, I like your analogy, like you said, from start to finish, and really being able to provide that information down the road is to me a huge plus of the GIS side of it.
Absolutely, and you really hit on I think a key point there that's worth just bringing right back out again, and that is, traditionally, surveyors, the surveying community on the front end of an engineering project, you were there at the beginning of the project. You're capturing the existing conditions. That's really your fundamental role in that particular capacity. And now we're seeing, the life cycle is really going on, and it's circling back to the beginning, because we have the ability now to as-built everything. And as you alluded to, operations and maintenance then come into play, and digital twinning is on the scene, and it's here to stay. It's real. I had to throw that out there.
Yep. Yeah, there's that keyword, digital twin.
And the technology is here for that to be a reality. And in the business, in the AEC business especially, and that's me kind of talking with all three hats on now, there are rudimentary or just the way that these projects have conventionally been approached from the life cycle of the project didn't really ever consider what we have the ability to do today. And so there are, contractual considerations and the break between when design ends and, construction begins. And then how do you tie that all back around to practically make that all happen and get the owner of the data at the end of the day that will continue to live on in their asset management system. Absolutely. So that's really, where we are. That's really where we are today, is working on that side of things too.
Well, and I like how you've now tied that really all together, like I said, with that three-legged stool of civil engineering, surveying, and GIS. Really the original question was supposed to be, what is surveying? But I think you've really tied it down very nicely, not just with the GIS, but now back with the civil engineering as well, that it all works in concert together. And when it's all hitting on all cylinders, it's a great opportunity to merge all this data and really make something of it, and have more than just, oh, well, this is just this back a curb at this point in time, and this is it. That data has more meaning to it. And I like how you tied that all together.
Well, thank you. That's something I'm very passionate about, because I do see it frequently in my position, and that is that the data doesn't end anymore. It used to be you designed, you built, the data is done. You bid the project, set of plans is done, you bid it, it gets built, that's the end of the story. that's not the end of the story anymore. That's just the beginning. Now that data is going to live on, and for years, decades, perhaps in another capacity, and that's new. That's different.
Yep.
For us.
No, that's very good. That's very good. Well, I think you've answered the question of what is surveying, and I like all those answers, and I think we've got a pretty good takeaway from here. So I'm going to go out on a limb and say, I'm telling the audience, write this name down, Linda Foster. You're going to hear more from this lady because I think she's going to be making more noise in NSPS and the surveying and GIS and civil engineering world. You can say you heard it here first. That I tell you what, it's been fun to get to know you in just this short amount of time in the last several months, and your enthusiasm is it's contagious. And I've been saying this to several other interviewees this year. Whether you know it or not, you're a role model for a new generation out there that have their passions in several places. And to see how these all come together and how excited that gets you to do your job, that to me is giving another generation hope that, you know what, they can find that profession with us as well. So thank you. Very, very well done. I do have one question left then, because since this is kind of a hybrid anyway, getting to know Linda Foster and the What is Surveying, since you've had your fingers in lots of different pots in your career with all three professions, what to you makes a good mentor for not really each of those, but collectively? What has there been mentors that have really been able to draw out the good things in all three of those professions during the course of your career, and what made them a good mentor?
Oh, hands down, that, there's one characteristic that stands out in my mind, and it doesn't matter what profession you want to, I could say that I have crossed paths with them or not, but they care. It's that simple. At the end of the day, they love what they do and they care. And that caring piece of it comes into wanting to see what they do live on, wanting to see what they do flourish, and see, people coming up behind them succeeding. That's been the number one asset I would say I've seen just universally in good mentors. Very
good. And you're absolutely right. And that's what I try to tell people as well, that when people give you the time of day and they listen and they care, there's no better feeling in the world when you're working towards something and somebody's giving you that attention. You're absolutely right. So, all right, Miss Foster, I'm going to let you go. It's going to be dinner time here shortly. So we appreciate your time. We appreciate your expertise, your input. And like I said, people, you're going to hear this name again, so write it down. So that'll do it for us this week. We're going to continue this series, and I think you're going to be pretty excited to hear some of the people coming up and really answer that question of what is surveying from many, many different perspectives, from those who've been there, those who know, and those who can respect where things are going. So this has been Tim Burch for Surveyor Says, and we'll see you again soon. Thank you. You've been listening to the Surveyor Says podcast, brought to you by the National Society of Professional Surveyors. If you have any questions about today's episode or any other topic, please email us at info@nsps.us.com, and we are here to help. Visit our website, nsps.us.com, to learn more about our association, the programs we administer and support, our sustaining members, and information about future episodes of Surveyor Says. Subscribe to the podcast on iTunes, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, iHeartRadio, Spotify, as well as our podcast host, Podbean. And remember, it's a great day to be a surveyor.